Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. The first thing I'm going to address today is a comment that was posted on a recent video. I don't usually read the comments on the video, so I wouldn't normally have noticed this. But a friend sent me this. He didn't say why he sent it, but I think he sent it because he wanted to know what my response to it would be. The comment itself seems to me to be very frivolous. The person who's written it doesn't seem to be seriously trying to understand Bhagavan's teachings. So it's not the sort of comment I would usually reply to. But because it's a very important subject, I will reply to it. It's actually a reply to a comment. So I'll read the previous two comments first. Just a moment, I'll find where they are. This was a video that was from last month, from the 27th of June last month. And someone had written a comment on it. Thank you. And then he gives a link to a timestamp, 27 minutes, 19 seconds, and he quotes something that I said there. One important thing to understand about vasanas. Vasanas are inclinations. We are not bound by our inclinations. Generally, we follow our inclinations, but we are not bound to follow our inclinations. So that is what I had said in that video. And then another friend wrote a comment in support of that. What that other person, a second person wrote is, and as Michael said, Vishaya vasanas have no strength of their own, but only the strength we give them by our attention. And he wrote, and then she quotes something I wrote in a blog post some 5 years or so ago. What I had written there is, we are free at every moment either to allow ourselves to be swayed by whatever vasanas may arise or not to be swayed by them. So what is quoted in this comment and reply are things that I said. And I think anyone who has seriously tried to understand Bhagavan's teachings will recognize that though what is quoted is my words, what I'm expressing there are fundamental principles about Bhagavan's teachings. But someone then wrote a very frivolous comment in reply to that, which was a comment that I was sent by a friend. What that person wrote is, this is a circular reference by Michael and can lead to confusion. Quotation, we are free at every moment either to allow ourselves to be swayed by whatever vasanas may arise or not be swayed by them. That is what the person says is a circular reference. I don't know what they mean by saying it's circular, but anyway, that's what they say. And then they went on to comment on this. Who exactly is free not to be swayed by vasanas? Ego mind? Question mark. That cannot be, since ego mind only exists in unison with Vishaya vasanas. Ego mind cannot stop being swayed by Vishaya vasanas, since any action by ego mind are Vishaya vasanas. They are put in capitals and block letters. As Bhagavan taught, the thief cannot pretend to be the policeman, meaning ego, the thief, cannot pretend it could do anything in being a policeman to stop being a thief. That is pseudo self-enquiry. Instead of proper self-enquiry, instead, with proper self-enquiry, ego mind is attending to itself, what is, in practical terms, being. Is there anyone who does being? No. Who would that be? Any claiming of any action is a Vishaya vasana. The idea or feeling of doing, maybe concentration or focusing, is also a Vishaya vasana. When we attend to I am, there is no one who is attending. There is no subject-object relationship between the attender and the attended. We can only be I am, and then there is no we in being. That we or I is a Vishaya vāsanā itself. We are not aware of the first thought I in being. Michael needs to clarify this better in order that people understand how to properly practice self-inquiry. Okay, there are many things here but in this comment that show a lack of understanding or a lack of even carefully trying to consider what Bhagavan means. I'll go through the points one by one. Who exactly is free not to be swayed by Vishaya vasanas? Ego, mind? Yes, of course. That is, Vishaya vasanas are ego's inclinations. So it is ego who is swayed by inclinations, and it is ego who is free to choose whether to be swayed by any particular inclination or not. This should be obvious to anyone. There are countless inclinations arising in our mind, moment to moment. As Bhagavan says, they rise in countless numbers like ocean waves. But there are so many inclinations that rise, but we don't necessarily act upon. We can't act upon all our inclinations because often we have inclinations pulling us in opposite directions. So we ego are the ones who decide whether we are swayed by any particular vasana or not swayed by it. We have that freedom. This is what Bhagavan called Icha Swatantra, the freedom of will. And that freedom of will is the basis of Kriya Swatantra, freedom of action. So we have Icha Kriya Swatantra, freedom of will and freedom of action. Bhagavan made that very clear. If, as this person claims, that we are not free, then they go on to say, that cannot be since ego mind only exists in unison with the Vishaya vasanas. Yes, whenever we rise as ego, we rise along with Vishaya vasanas. That is, it is the nature of ego to have Vishaya vasanas. This is for a very simple reason. If we consider what Bhagavan says about ego in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, where he very clearly explains what the nature of ego is, he describes ego as a formless demon. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. Having no form of its own means it's got no separate existence, because it's only forms that distinguish one thing from another. Only forms are distinct from one another. In a state of formlessness, there's no distinction, no separate existence. So in its original state, formless state, ego is devoid of form. So in its fundamental state, it is nothing but pure awareness. Only when it identifies itself as a form does it seem to have a separate existence. So what Bhagavan says from the beginning of the verse, that it's in the final line that he describes ego as a formless demon. From the beginning, he says, grasping form, it comes into existence. What does he mean by grasping form? He means projecting and identifying the form of a body as I. The form of a body means not just the physical form of the body, all the five sheaths are included in the term body, as he had earlier clarified in verse 5 of Uludunapadu. So grasping form, it comes into being, means as soon as we rise as ego, we project the form of a body and identify it as I. We can see this very clearly in dream. When we are dreaming, we always experience ourselves as a body within that dream world. And as soon as the dream starts, our experience is, I am this body, and here is this world. So the identification with the body occurs simultaneous with the rising of ego, because without identifying a body as I, the ego has no separate existence of its own. So it comes into being grasping form. I mean, as soon as it rises, it grasps the form. So, and since it has a separate existence only because it has identified the form of the body as I, he goes on in the second sentence to say, grasping form, it stands. Stands here implies it endures. That is, ego cannot come into being or continue to be without constantly grasping the form of a body as I. So identifying itself with a form is the fundamental nature of ego. But ego, having grasped the form of a body as I, ego doesn't stop there. It then, through the five senses, it projects an external world, and within the mind, it projects an internal world of thoughts and feelings and emotions and so on. It is constantly attending to these things. That is, the external world consists of forms. The internal world of thoughts and feelings, they're also forms. So it's constantly attending to these forms. So Bhagavan says, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. That is the very food on which ego lives. The very food that nourishes it is constantly attending to forms. Well, grasping form here means, how does ego grasp forms? It grasps it in its awareness, whereas ego essentially is nothing but awareness. So by being aware of things other than itself, that is how it grasps the form, and that grasping is feeding, is what feeds ego, feeds and nourishes ego. Then he says, uruvittu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. That is, because it cannot stand for a moment without constantly grasping form, if it leaves one form, it will grasp another form. So throughout the waking and dream states, the mind is, the basic form it grasps is this, the form of a body consisting of five sheaths. The five sheaths means the physical form of the body, the life that animates it, and the mind, intellect, and will that operate within it. These five are referred to as the panchakosha, or five sheaths. This is what the mind is constantly holding on to throughout. The ego or mind is constantly holding on to throughout the waking and dream states. And it is further attending to all the other things, all the perceptions, all the images of the world that we see and hear and taste and touch, as if they're outside ourselves. And inwardly, we are attending to thoughts, to feelings, to memories, to these perceptual images that are constantly seem to be coming in from outside. This is the condition of ego throughout the waking and dream state. So ego is constantly grasping form. Because ego cannot, and what Bhagavan refers to here as form is any object, any phenomenon is a form. So yeah, attending to phenomena is the very nature of ego. Ego cannot survive for a moment without constantly attending to phenomena. The Sanskrit word for phenomena is vishaya. Vishaya vāsanā means the inclination to attend to vishayas, or the inclination to seek happiness in vishayas. It amounts to the same thing. So, since ego cannot survive without constantly attending to vishayas, it naturally has very strong inclinations to attend to vishayas. That is what vishaya vasanas are. So yes, it is true, but ego exists only along with it. Well, the person here wrote in unison with I don't exactly know what the implication of unison is, but it exists along with its Vishaya vasanas. That is the Vishaya. But the important thing to understand is the Vishaya vasanas belong to ego. Ego is not the Vishaya vasanas. Ego has the Vishaya vasanas. That is, vasanas are inclinations. So who is who is inclined by these inclinations? It is ego. So they're ego's Vishaya vasanas. And then the person goes on to say, ego mind cannot stop being swayed by Vishaya vasanas, since any action by ego mind are Vishaya vasanas. No, this is where this is where the water begins to be muddied. Vasanas are not actions. Vasanas are the inclinations to act. That is, Vishaya vasanas also sometimes referred to as karma vasanas, the inclinations to act. That is, in order to experience the Vishayas, we need to do actions by mind, speech, or body. So the Vishaya vasanas are themselves karma vasanas. So they're the inclinations to act, not the actions themselves. The actions are the result of the Vishaya vasanas. But there's no logic in what this person argues here. Ego mind cannot stop being swayed by Vishaya vasanas, since any action by ego mind are Vishaya vasanas. They put "are" in capitals and bold type. Actions are not Vishaya vasanas. Actions are the result of Vishaya vasanas. We act under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas. So we are free either to be swayed or not to be swayed, either to act under the sway of any particular Vishaya vasana or not to be swayed by it. If we were bound to act in accordance with our vasanas, our inclinations, there would be no way we could attain liberation. Because in order to practice self-investigation, we need to attend to ourselves. The Vishaya vasanas are our inclination to attend to things other than ourselves. Vishayas are all objects, phenomena, in other words, things other than ourselves. So long as we allow ourselves to be swayed by Vishaya vasanas, we're attending to Vishayas, not to ourselves. So in order to attend to ourselves, we need to refrain from being swayed by the Vishaya vasanas. To the extent to which we are attending to ourselves, to that extent we are refraining from being swayed by Vishaya vasanas. So to say that we cannot avoid being swayed by Vishaya vasanas is tantamount to saying we cannot do self-inquiry, we cannot do self-investigation, which is patently, obviously, that's not what Bhagavan is teaching us. That's contrary to Bhagavan's teachings. Then this person who writes the comment goes on to misuse an analogy that Bhagavan often used, the analogy of the thief pretending to be a policeman trying to catch the thief. What the person here writes, as Bhagavan taught, the thief cannot pretend to be the policeman. Well, Bhagavan didn't say the thief cannot pretend to be the policeman. The thief, in the analogy, the thief does pretend to be a policeman. And by pretending to be a policeman, it evades capture. This Bhagavan, there's a place in talks, I'll find where it is. I kept that reference open. Yes, in section 615 of talks, Bhagavan indicates from where he got this analogy, or what gave him the idea for this analogy. I'll read the whole passage because it's relevant here. Another from the group asked, how is ego to be destroyed? We always have to remember when we're reading talks, these are not the exact words of Bhagavan. Bhagavan would have replied in Tamil. Someone has recorded it in English from memory. So it's not exact words of Bhagavan, but we just had to take the gist of it. So according to what's recorded here, Bhagavan replied, hold the ego first and then asked how it can be destroyed. This is something often Bhagavan used to say when people asked about how to destroy ego or something. He'd say, first find this ego and bring it here. Then we can find out how to kill it. Because if we look for it, no such thing will be found. That's why Bhagavan often said like that. So I think that is what he would have said here, but it's not very clearly recorded. Hold the ego first and then ask how it can be destroyed. If we try to hold ego, there's nothing to be held. We won't find anything. So Bhagavan goes on to say, who asked the question? It is ego. Can ego ever agree to kill itself? Again, here, I think it's probably not exactly how Bhagavan put it, because ego, that is, we need to be willing to surrender ourselves. If we're not willing to surrender ourselves, if we're not willing to be killed, that is, Bhagavan is never going to kill ego until we are willing to surrender ourselves completely, until we are willing to be killed. So this, I think, is a little bit not very clearly recorded here. This question is a sure way to cherish the ego and not to kill it. If you seek the ego, you will find that it does not exist. This is the way to destroy it. So this is the whole point, is that ego seems to exist so long as we're attending to things other than ourselves. But if we investigate what is this ego, if we look within to see who am I, this ego, there's no such thing as ego to be found, because what seems to be ego is actually just pure awareness. If we see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the way to get rid of the snake is to look at it very carefully, because if we look at it very carefully, we'll see, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. Likewise, if we look at ourselves, who now seem to be ego, very carefully, we will find that what we actually are is not ego, but only pure awareness. So that's what Bhagavan means here when he says, if you seek ego, you will find it does not exist. If you look carefully at the snake, you will see it doesn't exist. It amounts to saying the same thing. This is the way to destroy it. Then he goes on to say, in this connection, I'm often reminded of a funny incident which took place when I was living in the West Chitre Street in Madurai. A neighbor in an adjoining house anticipated the visit of a thief to his house. He took precautions to catch him. He posted policemen in mufti. Mufti is it's an Indian, it's a word that's often used in Indian languages. It means plain clothes. So he posted policemen in mufti to guard the two ends of the lane, and the entrance and back door of his own house. The thief came as expected, and the men rushed to catch him. He took the situation in at a glance and shouted, hold him, there he runs, there. Saying so, he made good his escape. So this is where Bhagavan got this idea of this analogy of a thief pretending to be a policeman. That thief, to avoid being captured, he distracted the attention of the police as if he was one of them, saying, there he goes, look, I've run after him there. And so he made good his escape. And then Bhagavan, the passage concludes, but Bhagavan said, so it is with ego. Look for it and it will not be found. That is the way to get rid of it. This is, again, it's obviously not very well recorded, because so it is with ego. It's that is, the connection with their story is not brought out very clearly. That is, if we allow us, that is the reason Bhagavan used this thief analogy, is in this case the thief, pretending to be a policeman, he distracted the attention of the police away from himself by saying, there he goes. So their attention was distracted away from him. This is what happens in any form of sadhana, other than Atma-vichara, we are attending to something other than ourselves. But in order to get rid of ego, we need to attend to ourselves alone. So Bhagavan concludes this passage, so it is with ego. Look for it and it will not be found. That is the way to get rid of it. So this is the context or this is the seed, we can say, of this analogy that Bhagavan often used, of the thief pretending to be a policeman. But this person here is written, the thief cannot pretend to be a policeman. That's not what Bhagavan taught. The thief does pretend to be a policeman and thereby evades capture. When the thief pretends to be a policeman, thereby he evades capture. That's the whole point. So this person hasn't really thought about this analogy very carefully. But they go on to say, meaning ego, the thief, cannot pretend it could do anything in being a policeman to stop being a thief. This is not what Bhagavan used this analogy for. And then they end with a comment, this is pseudo self-inquiry. I don't know what they mean by pseudo self-inquiry. What self-inquiry or Atma-vichara is, Bhagavan made very clear in Nana. In Nana, he gave a very clear, unequivocal definition of Atma-vichara. He said, Sada kalmum manate atmavil veitiruptikutan Atma-vicharam endrupaya. This is a sentence in the 16th paragraph of Nana. What that means is the name Atma-vichara is only for always keeping the mind on oneself, on Atma. So what is self-inquiry? It is, or Atma-vichara, or self-investigation. It is keeping our mind on ourself. In other words, keeping our attention fixed on ourself. That alone is self-inquiry. Anything other than that is not self-inquiry. So what they mean by pseudo self-inquiry, I don't know. So long as we're being swayed by Vishaya vasanas, we are not practicing Vishaya, or to the extent to it, let's put it this way, because there are degrees of self-attentiveness. So to the extent to which we are being swayed by Vishaya vasanas, we are attending to things other than ourselves and thereby not attending to ourselves. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we are thereby refraining from attending to other things, meaning that we're refraining from being swayed by Vishaya vasanas. But I want to explain this analogy of the thief and policeman a bit more here, because I have often seen people misusing this analogy because they don't understand it clearly. The place where Bhagavan uses this analogy most, the place where but this is an analogy Bhagavan used on many occasions. It's recorded a few times in talks, but the clearest recording of what Bhagavan said about using this analogy is in Maharshi's Gospel, Book 2, Chapter 1. That's a chapter on self-investigation, Atma-vichara, self-investigation. So what he says there on pages 50 to 51 in some editions, every kind of sadhana except Atma-vichara presupposes the retention of the mind as the instrument for carrying on the sadhana, and without the mind it cannot be practiced. Then a little further on he says, the attempt to destroy the ego or mind through sadhanas other than Atma-vichara is just like the thief assuming the guise of a policeman to catch the thief that is himself. Atma-vichara alone can reveal the truth, but neither ego nor mind really exists, and enables one to realize the pure, undifferentiated being of the self or the absolute. And there's another, in talks, section 43, he also uses this analogy. If the inquiry is made whether the mind exists, it will be found that the mind does not exist. That is control of the mind. Otherwise, if the mind is taken to exist, and if one seeks to control it, it amounts to the mind controlling the mind, just like a thief turning out to be a policeman to catch the thief, i.e. himself. Mind persists in that way, but eludes itself. We have to think carefully about what actually Bhagavan means here by this analogy. Some people say that because in Maharsha's Gospel it's recorded, every sadhana except Atma-vichara presupposes the retention of the mind as the instrument for carrying on the sadhana. Without the mind, it cannot be practiced. Some people wrongly infer from this that Atma-vichara is done without the mind. That is obviously not the case. The instrument for doing any sadhana is the mind. The difference between Atma-vichara and other sadhanas, in other sadhanas, the reality of mind in the sense of ego, that is the knower, the reality of ego is taken for granted. And then we set out to try and control this ego or subdue the ego or bring about its destruction. But if you presuppose its existence, there's no way to get rid of it. So long as you really believe there's a snake there, you're not going to be able to get rid of it. You can take big sticks and beat it and do all sorts of things to it, but you're not going to kill it because it never was a snake. The only way to get rid of the snake is to look at it carefully and see that it is not actually a snake, but just a rope. Likewise with ego. The only way, or ego or mind, that is that we need to be careful when we're talking about the term mind, or when the term mind is used. We need to understand from a context the sense in which it is being used. The term mind can refer to thoughts in general, or mental phenomena in general. That is the objective aspect of the mind. But we also use the mind to refer to the knower of all the thoughts. That knower is ego. So when we talk about, in this context, when Bhagavan's talking about the mind, what he means by mind is ego, which is why it's recorded as neither the mind nor the ego. They're the same in this context. That is, the ego is the knowing aspect of the mind, the awareness, the aspect of the mind that knows all other. That ego is the first thought, the thought I. That is the thought that knows all other thoughts. Though ego is a thought, it's a thought unlike all other thoughts, because all other thoughts are jada, they're devoid of awareness, they're objects. Whereas ego is the subject, it's what knows all the other thoughts. So it's in that sense that mind is being used here. So in other sadhanas, the mind is being used to bring about some change. So you're taking the mind for granted. The reality of the mind is taken for granted. In the case of Atma-vichara, we are using the mind. Of course, it's only the mind that must attend to itself, but we are not taking its existence for granted. Does this ego really exist, or does it just seem to exist? That is, so we are investigating the reality of ego. We're investigating to see whether ego is what it seems to be. When we investigate it, we find, oh, it is not ego, it is just pure awareness. Just like if we look carefully at the snake, we see, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. So that is the distinction between Atma-vichara and other forms of sadhana. In other forms of sadhana, that's why Bhagavan compared other forms of sadhana to a thief pretending to be a policeman who's trying to catch the thief. That is, why does the thief pretend to be a policeman? In order to distract attention away from himself. So that incident he told in Chopakanayakan Street, but about that thief, the thief, by saying there he goes, catch him, he pretended to be on the side of the police trying to catch the thief. What he succeeded in doing was distracting the attention of the police away from himself towards some other non-existent person. And that's how he evaded capture, because he distracted the attention away from himself. This is what happens when a thief pretends to be the policeman. He's no longer the suspect because he's on the side of the police. So he evades capture because he's no longer suspected of being the thief. So in other sadhanas, we are diverting our attention away from ourselves towards other things, and thereby we never catch the thief. In Atma-vichara, we don't allow the thief to distract his attention away from himself. We turn our attention back towards the thief, namely ego, to see what is this ego, to investigate ego itself. That is how the thief is caught, because when we investigate, there's no such thing as ego at all. So that is tantamount to capturing and punishing the thief, because the thief, in this case, the thief was never actually real. It was just an imposter. Ego is not real. What ego seems to be is not what it actually is. When we rise as ego, we are aware of ourselves as I am this body, and consequently we are aware of the appearance of other things. This is the nature of ego. The two defining characteristics of ego is that as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body, and we are consequently aware of the appearance of other things. This is not what we actually are. What we actually are is pure awareness, awareness that never knows anything other than itself, because there is nothing other than itself. Because pure awareness is the infinite whole. There's nothing other than it. So it alone exists. But when we rise as ego, we project the form of a body, which we take to be ourself, and consequently we project the appearance of so many other things. And so we're aware of these things. So in order to destroy this ego, we cannot destroy this ego by attending to anything other than ourselves. Because by attending to anything other than ourselves, we are feeding and nourishing ego. So we need to attend to ourselves. And in order to attend to ourselves, we need to refrain from being swayed by our Vishaya vasanas. Because our Vishaya vasanas are our inclinations to attend to things other than ourselves. So how can we attend to ourselves if we don't refrain from being swayed by the Vishaya vasanas, the inclinations to attend to other things? It should be obvious to anyone who has tried to understand Bhagavan's teachings seriously and has tried to put them into practice. Then this person goes on to say, instead, with proper self-inquiry, ego mind is attending to itself, what is, in practical terms, being. Yes, that is that is obviously true. That is, when we attend to ourselves, the nature of ego, as Bhagavan explains in that verse 25, after saying leaving form a grass form, he then says, Tedinal autum pidicum. If seeking, it takes flight. If seeking there implies if ego seeks to know its own reality, what it actually is, it will take flight. That is, it'll run away. It'll subside and dissolve back into its source. So to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we as ego subside. And where do we subside? We subside back into our being. So this is another fundamental difference between Atma-vichara and any other type of sadhana. In all other types of sadhana, we're attending to something other than ourselves. Attending to anything other than ourselves is an activity, because all other things, they're mental projections. So they're brought into being by mental activity. And attending to them is also an activity, because we're allowing our attention to move away from ourselves towards those other things. These are not actually two different activities. Attending to them and projecting them is one and the same thing. We project things that we attention to anything other than ourselves and projection of that thing are one and the same thing, because the other things seem to exist only when we attend to them, when we are aware of them. So whereas all other forms of sadhana are doing, involve some sort of action of mind, speech, or body, Atma-vichara is a cessation of doing. It's a subsidence of ego, the doer, back into its source and substance, namely its own being. Is there anyone who does being? This person writes. Obviously not. It's not a doing. It's a state of being. No. Who would that be? I'm reading the comment again. Any claiming of any action is a Vishaya vāsanā. Again, this is misusing the term Vishaya vāsanā. Claiming an action is not Vishaya vāsanā. Vishaya vāsanā is the inclination to act. And when we act, who is the doer of any action? It is ego. That is, the nature of ego is to identify itself, identify the mind, speech, and body as itself. So any action done by mind, speech, and body are experienced by ego as I am doing this. And why does ego act through mind, speech, and body? Because of its Vishaya vasanas. So this person obviously hasn't thought carefully about what they're writing. They're just writing anything off the top of their head. Claiming any action is not a Vishaya vasana. The vasana is the inclination to do that action. And then they go and say, the idea of feeling of doing, maybe concentration or focusing, is also a Vishaya vasana. No, it is not. That is doership. It is the nature of ego to have doership, because under the sway of its Vishaya vasanas, ego acts through its three instruments of action, namely mind, speech, and body. Because it's acting through those, it experiences the actions done by those instruments as actions done by itself, because it identifies those instruments as itself. That is how doership arises. So doership and Vishaya vasanas, obviously they're related, but they're not the same thing. Then they go on to say, when we attend to I am, there is no one who is attending to it. That is obviously absurd. You can't have attending without someone attending. And the very fact that they say, when we attend to I am, there is nobody who is attending to it, that they've already said who is attending, we. That we who are trying to, but we who attend to anything is ego. So in any act, in any attending, there can't be attending without ego who is attending. So in Atma-vichara, ego is attending to itself, to its own being. But by attending to its own being, it is thereby subsiding. So to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we as egos subside and eventually dissolve back into our being. Only when we dissolve back into our being does ego come to an end. And when ego comes to an end, attention comes to an end also. What remains then is just pure awareness. But so long as there's any attending, there's an ego who is doing the attending. That should be obvious to anyone. You can't have an action without a doer. Attending to anything other than ourselves is an action. Attending to ourselves is a cessation of action. But there still has to be an ego to do the attending. Only when ego comes to an end does the attending come to an end. Because ego is the one who is attending. There is no subject-object relationship between the attender and the attended. In Atma-vichara, that is true. Ego is attending to itself, so there's no subject-object relationship. But in the previous sentence, they said there's nobody who is attending, and then in this sentence they say there's no subject-object relationship between the attender and the attended. Why? Because the attender and the attended are one and the same thing. It's ego attending to itself. But the very fact that they use the term attender means they're accepting that there's someone who's doing the attending. So this is a typical frivolous comment. This is why I wouldn't normally answer such things, but because I was sent this, I've just clarified these things. I'm answering this. And then they go on to say, we can only be I am, and then there is no we in being. If we're being I am, that the we is nothing but I am. So it's creating confusion. That we or I is a vishaya vāsanā. No, it is not. The I that is being I am is I am alone, not a vishaya vāsanā. So full of confusion. We are not aware of the first thought in being. No, obviously not. In being, there is no first thought. Michael needs to clarify this better. Okay, that's the end. So I've answered all the points, but one thing I wanted to say, in particular in this context, many people, from the way they ask questions or the comments that this is why nowadays I don't read comments, because either comments are written by people who understand, or they're written by people who don't understand. If they're written by people who understand, they don't need replying to. If they're written by others, it's because they haven't done enough thinking to understand these things properly. Whoever wrote this comment hasn't seriously tried to understand Bhagavan's teachings. If we don't try to understand Bhagavan's teachings, we cannot put them into practice. That is a lot of the questions that I'm asked. They're asked by people. Well, the reason people ask questions, it's not wrong to ask questions, but the question should be asked sincerely, trying to understand Bhagavan's teachings. If we go on and on asking questions, that means we're not really doing our own manana, trying to understand the teachings for ourselves. So what I wanted to say in this context, this is a general thing, not referring just to this comment, but to all of us in general. It is extremely naive to think that we can practice Bhagavan's teachings correctly without understanding them correctly. Trying to understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly is very, very important, because if we're not understanding his teachings correctly, we can't. This practice of self-investigation is an extremely simple practice, but it's also extremely subtle. So it requires a subtlety of understanding. And if we don't understand what it is we are trying to practice, how can we practice it? So if we are serious about following Bhagavan's path, we need to be serious about trying to understand what his teachings. So, for example, when we read this snake and rope this thief pretending to be a policeman analogy, we need to think about it carefully to understand why Bhagavan used this analogy and what the implication is. Unfortunately, as I say, this the books in which these analogies have been recorded often are not expressing it very well. Bhagavan would have expressed it very, very clearly, but those who recorded it didn't always understand the subtleties and nuances of what Bhagavan was saying. So such an analogy, Bhagavan hasn't mentioned this particular analogy in his own original writings. So it's only in Maharsha's Gospel and Talks that we come across this analogy. Maybe in Day, I can't remember. But it is an analogy Bhagavan often used. But even if it's not very well recorded, we still need to think about it and try to understand, what does Bhagavan mean when he says all other sadhanas are like the thief pretending to be a policeman? Only Atma-vichara can reveal the truth of that mind or ego doesn't actually exist. We need to think about it and understand for ourselves what Bhagavan means, because in all other sadhanas, we're attending to something other than ourselves. We are thereby distracting our attention away from ourselves towards some other thing. So we can't know what we actually are so long as we're attending to something other than ourselves. In order to know what we actually are, we need to attend to ourselves. So only in Atma-vichara are we actually attending to ourselves. Are we actually investigating the thief? In other sadhanas, we're allowing the thief to distract our attention away from ourselves. But who is the thief? The thief is ourself, this ego. So if we attend to something other than ourselves, we are allowing ourselves to be distracted away from knowing what we should be knowing, which is knowing who am I, what we actually are. So anyone who is serious about wanting to follow Bhagavan's path of self-investigation and self-surrender, Atma-vichara and Atma-samarpanam, these are both very deep and subtle paths. Actually, ultimately they're one and the same path. But we need to understand correctly what it is Bhagavan is teaching us. So only if we have a clear and comprehensive understanding of his teachings will we be able to put them into practice. If we've got a half-baked understanding, if our understanding is confused, our practice will be equally confused. So to follow Bhagavan's path, we need to be serious about trying to understand correctly what Bhagavan is saying, why he uses when he uses an analogy, what is the significance of this analogy? What is he trying to convey? So many times I've heard this, I've come across people misapplying this analogy because they haven't thought about it carefully enough, what Bhagavan is actually saying. Sorry, that was quite a long explanation, but I hope this is a useful clarification because it's very, very important for us to understand what Vishaya vasanas are. Vishaya vasanas are our inclinations to attend to things other than ourselves. So in order to attend to ourselves, we need to refrain from being swayed by our Vishaya vasanas. But why being self-attentive is actually extremely simple. Why it seems to us to be difficult? Because we have such strong inclinations to attend to other things. So when we try to attend to ourselves, the inclination to attend to something, anything other than ourselves, will be felt very strongly. So this is the obstacle we're up against. If we've understood correctly what Atma-vichara is, that it's nothing but keeping our attention fixed on ourselves. If we've understood that, then the challenge we face in actually putting this into practice is that we have strong Vishaya vasanas. And we can weaken those Vishaya vasanas only by means of Atma-vichara. What I also meant to talk about in this context is paragraphs 10 and 11 of Nana, because if we read these paragraphs carefully and think about what Bhagavan is saying, we will understand what he means by Vishaya vasanas, and we won't. That is, the person who wrote this comment clearly hadn't thought deeply about what Bhagavan says in these two paragraphs. In paragraph 10, what he says is, even though Vishaya vasanas, which come from time immemorial, rise in countless numbers like ocean waves, they will all be destroyed when Swarupa Dhyana increases and increases. So what does he mean by Swarupa Dhyana? Swarupa is what we actually are, our own being, the fundamental awareness I am. That is Swarupa. So Swarupa Dhyana, meditation on Swarupa, means being self-attentive, attending to what we actually are, in other words, to our own being. So what he implies here is that to the extent to which we are self-attentive, which is what he means by when Swarupa Dhyana increases and increases, these Vishaya vasanas will all be destroyed. How are they destroyed? Because we are not allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. This is what I said, and what was quoted by the other two people who have written the comments prior to this one, that vasanas are inclinations. We are not bound by our inclinations. So we have a freedom to choose whether to be swayed by any particular inclination or not to be swayed by it. Vishaya vasanas are a name for all inclinations to attend to anything other than ourselves. These, as Bhagavan says, they are rising in countless numbers like ocean waves. That is, whole waking and dream states are nothing but a play of Vishaya vasanas rising to the surface of the mind. So they're rising in countless numbers. They're like ocean waves. Unceasingly they're going on throughout the waking and dream states. So if we allow ourselves to be swayed by the Vishaya vasanas, we'll never attend to ourselves. In order to attend to ourselves, we need to refrain from being swayed by the Vishaya vasanas. So anyone who says we can't refrain from being swayed by Vishaya vasanas is in effect saying we can't do Swarupa Dhyana, we can't do self-investigation, we can't attend to ourselves. Because in order to attend to ourselves, we need to refrain from being swayed by the inclination to attend to anything else. And then Bhagavan goes on to say, without giving room even to the doubting thoughts, so many vasanas ceasing, or putting an end to so many vasanas, is it possible to remain only as Swarupa? So instead of doubting that, it is necessary, he says very strongly in Tamil, Swarupa Dhyanate Vidapidiyai Pidikavendam. It is necessary to cling tenaciously to self-attentiveness. And then he says, however great a sinner one may be, if instead of lamenting and weeping, I am a sinner, how am I going to be saved? One completely rejects the thought that one is a sinner and is steadfast in self-attentiveness, one will certainly be reformed. Now, that means we'll be saved. We'll be saved from this ego will be annihilated, is the implication. And then in the next paragraph, he goes on to say, as long as Vishaya vasanas exist within the mind. What does he mean by as long as Vishaya vasanas exist within the mind? That is, so long as we have even the slightest inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves, so long the investigation, who am I, is necessary. As and when thoughts appear, I'll just add something here. He says, as and when thoughts appear. Why do thoughts appear? They appear because our attention has moved away from ourselves. So long as we're attending to ourselves, no thought can appear, because thoughts appear where? In our awareness. So they cannot appear without our attending to them. So when a thought appears, that means our attention has been diverted away from ourselves towards something else. How is it being diverted? Under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas. or some Vishaya vāsanā or other. So as and when thoughts appear, then and there it is necessary to annihilate them all by vicharana in the very place from which they rise. So what he's saying here is actually a very deep and subtle thing. That is, as soon as any thought arises, if we hold on firmly to self-attentiveness, that thought will be annihilated then and there in the very place from which it arises. In other words, it won't have a chance to rise any further, because if we're clinging firmly to self-attentiveness and don't allow ourselves to be swayed by any Vishaya vāsanā, the thoughts will thereby be annihilated as they arise. That is, the thought is a sprouting of a Vishaya vāsanā. The vāsana is often compared to seeds. So those seeds, they sprout in the form of thoughts. So as soon as they sprout, if we hold on firmly to self-attentiveness, they will thereby be annihilated then and there in the very place from which they arise. Now, what is the place from which they arise? From us. So they'll be destroyed in the heart itself, without being able to pull our attention away from ourselves. And then he goes on to give a very nice definition of vairagya. Vairagya means freedom from desire for anything other than ourselves. It's also what is called nirasa. Asa means desire. Nirasa is freedom from desire. So vairagya and nirasa are two synonyms. And what he says is, not attending to anything other is vairagya or nirasa. Not attending to anything other means anything other than ourselves. We attend to things other than ourselves under the sway of Vishaya vāsanas. So vairagya or nirasa is that state in which we refrain from being swayed by Vishaya vāsanas. We attend only to ourself, our own being. So not attending to anything other than oneself is vairagya or nirasa. Not leaving or not letting go of what he says in Tamil is tanne vida dirital jnanam. That means being without leaving or without letting go of oneself is jnana. Unmeil irendum andre. In truth, the two are one. The two mean these, he's referring to these two, vairagya and jnana, they're one and the same thing. That is, not letting go of ourselves is not attending to anything other than ourselves. If we attend to anything other than ourselves, we have thereby let go of ourselves. So our aim in Atma-vichara is to not let go of ourselves. In order to not let go of ourselves, we shouldn't allow ourselves to be swayed by any Vishaya vāsana. And then he to emphasize the importance of vairagya, the freedom from any inclination to attend to anything other than us. Well, we have the inclinations, but in spite of the inclination, we refrain from attending to anything other than ourselves. That is vairagya. And what he says about that in the next analogy, just as pearl divers tying stones to their waists and sinking, pick up pearls that are found at the bottom of the ocean, so each one, sinking deep within oneself with vairagya, may obtain Atma-mutu, the self-pearl. That means that we'll know ourselves as we actually are. We'll know and be what we actually are. But the analogy he uses here, the stones that pearl divers tie, without tying stones to their waist, the pearl divers cannot sink deep enough. So they need to tie stones to their waist. Likewise, we cannot sink deep enough into ourselves without the stone of vairagya. Vairagya is not attending to anything other than ourselves. So long as we allow ourselves to be swayed by Vishaya vasanas, we cannot sink deep within ourselves. In order to sink deep within ourselves, we need to refrain from attending to anything other than ourselves which means refraining from being swayed by the Vishaya vasanas. And then he goes on to say, it's a very, very important sentence here. If one clings fast to uninterrupted Swarupa Smarana until one attains Swarupa, that alone is sufficient. Now, the words in Tamil are Oruvan tan Sarupamadeam Varayel, Nirantara Sarupa Smaranaye Kai Patruvanayin Adu Andre Podam. It's a very strong statement there. All we need to do is to hold on to that Swarupa Smarana. Swarupa Smarana means the remembrance of our own Swarupa, our own being. So holding on to a remembrance of our own being, that we need to do uninterruptedly. If we're being swayed by Vishaya vasanas, we're not holding on to self-remembrance, because the Vishaya vasanas, but under the sway of Vishaya vasanas, we begin to attend to other things, and that by neglect to attend to our own Swarupa. So the implication in all these, throughout these two paragraphs, is that we can and must refrain from being swayed by Vishaya vasanas. And then he goes on to say, the last two sentences, he gives just an analogy, but we have to understand what he means by the analogy. So long as enemies are within the fortress, they will be continuously coming out from it. If one is continuously cutting down all of them, as and when they come, the fortress will be captured. So what are the enemies within the fortress? They're Vishaya vasanas. What of the fortress? One's own heart. So so long as there is still Vishaya vasanas lurking within in our heart, they'll be continuously coming out. That is, if a fortress is being besieged, if there's no food and water in the fortress, the enemies in the fortress will have no choice but to come out seeking food and water. So there's no food for the Vishaya vasanas in the heart. In order to nourish the Vishaya vasanas, our attention needs to go out and attend to things other than ourselves. If we don't attend to things other than ourselves, we are depriving the Vishaya vasanas of the food and water on which they survive. So if a fortress has abundant food and water inside, the enemy need not come out when they're being besieged. But if they don't have food and water, they have no choice. They have to come out. So the vasanas will be constantly rising till ego is destroyed. Ego is the root of Vishaya vasanas. So Vishaya vasanas can be destroyed completely only when ego is destroyed completely. So long as ego survives, Vishaya vasanas will continue rising, continue coming out from the heart. What we have to do is refrain from being swayed by them by clinging firmly to self-attentiveness. That's how we cut them down. So that's why he says, if one is continuously cutting them, all of them down as and when they come, the fortress will eventually be captured. In other words, we'll eventually regain control of our own heart. Will no longer be there'll no longer be an ego to be swayed by Vishaya vasanas. When ego is destroyed, it's Vishaya vasanas are destroyed. Then only is the fortress recaptured. So sorry, that was a very long explanation, but I hope that is useful.
Yes, Michael. Thank you. There was a clarifying question raised by Thiru. Thiru, if you're there, can you ask your question?
Yes. Thanks for the explanation, Michael. So I understand the application of the analogy of policeman and robber in practices other than self-investigation, where we are retaining the mind. I have a question. The question is, can we apply the analogy when we do the practice also? For example, as beginners, like when we start doing self-investigation, the process is to focus our attention on ourselves but we tend to look for I, or look for this I thought. So the robber is pretending to be a policeman to see the robber, but actually he himself is the robber. So he has to not look outside, but inside, within ourselves. So can we apply the analogy there?
Yes, we can. This is what I was saying. That is, if we haven't understood Bhagavan's teachings correctly, we will not be able to apply them in practice correctly. Because what he has taught, attending to ourselves, is actually something very simple, but it is very, very subtle. So we cannot attend to ourselves correctly unless we've understood clearly what it is that Bhagavan is teaching us. What does Bhagavan mean by self-attentiveness? We need to think very carefully about this, and we need to understand we're not looking for any object. We're not looking for some object called the I thought, but that is, we can often hear the way people talk about the I thought, it's as if it was some sort of object. The most ridiculous case of all I heard, a certain lady who claims to be enlightened. Before her enlightenment, her I thought was bouncing around inside her skull and giving her a headache or something like that. This is so obviously absurd. But people have written books about these things and take them seriously. But I thought is not an object. I thought is ego, is the subject. So it can never be, we can never find some object called the I thought. If we look for it, it takes flight. There's no, because we seem to be ego, or I thought, only so long as we're attending to things other than ourselves. If we attend to ourselves, there's no such thing as ego or I thought to be found. So it's very, very important that we understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly, because if we don't understand them correctly, we may be thinking that we're practicing Atma-vichara when in fact we're attending to something other than ourselves. We're attending to there's the I thought, I must attend to that. But it's not an object, it's the subject, it's the one who is attending. So what we are to attend to is the one who is attending. What does that mean? Each of us needs to think about it very carefully in order to understand it for ourselves. And we won't understand unless we try to put it into practice. And of course, when we first try, we make mistakes. We fall into this trap of looking for some object. But it's not any object we're looking for. It's we ourselves we're to attend to. So if we do anything other than attending only to our own being, thinking we're doing self-investigation, then we're not doing self-investigation. Then we are, as you say, we are like the thief becoming a policeman, pretending to be a policeman to distract the attention of the police away from the thief towards there he goes. We are diverting our attention away from ourselves. Anything that involves diverting our attention away from ourselves is the thief pretending to be a policeman in that analogy.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Michael, I'm going to read a question from Jose Carlos from the chat, which is for the same topic. And then after that, we can go to the questions we have received. So Carlos, if you're okay, I can read it. The question is, I have heard some other story involving police. I don't know the source, where a police officer kills someone and then he's assigned to investigate who is the murderer of the person he himself killed. So will he truly turn himself in? The police officer, like ego, will probably point to some other suspect other than himself to evade capture. Does this analogy illustrate how reluctant ego is to investigate itself, since the investigation compromises its own survival?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I've never heard this. What I suspect is someone has maybe elaborated on the analogy given by Bhagavan to possibly to drive home the point still more clearly. Yes, the aim of the in Bhagavan's analogy of a thief becoming a policeman, the aim of the thief pretending to be a policeman is to divert attention away from himself. So, and this analogy, Carlos, in this analogy you give, again, the aim of a policeman will be to divert attention away from himself. So to find some other suspect and try and pin the crime on that other suspect. So these are all analogies. What we need to do is to think about how this applies to our practice. Attending to anything other than ourselves is what Bhagavan means by the thief pretending to be a policeman. Because by attending to something other than ourselves, we are diverting our attention away from ourselves towards some other thing. And thereby, we as ego are escaping capture. So, or rather, we are escaping exposure. When we attend to ourself, we expose the unreality of ourself as ego. So that is what when the thief diverts attention away from himself, he's trying to avoid exposure. He's trying to avoid being found to be the thief. But in Atma-vichara, we're not trying to avoid exposure. We are trying to expose the reality of ego, what ego actually is. Ego as ego is non-existent. What ego actually is only pure awareness. So just like the snake, as a snake is non-existent, as a rope, it is real. So it's unreal as a snake, it's real as a rope. Likewise, ego is unreal as ego, but real as Satchit, pure being awareness. Is that
Thank you,
clear
Michael.
answer?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very
Right.
much. That's
Right.
very clear.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. We will now move to the questions we have received. The first one I want to read is from Sanjay Lohia. So let me read that paragraph. It's a different topic. So
Yes.
we are moving from this topic to a different topic. So the question is, I believe Sadhu Om was physically with Bhagavan for only about the last 4 years of Bhagavan's bodily life. I believe that after Bhagavan left the body, Sadhu Om at one point greatly missed his physical presence. He therefore longed intensely for Bhagavan to appear before him once again in form. He even composed several verses in which he poured out the anguish of his heart during that period. The question, what was the gist of those verses? We all know that Sadhu Om was a highly mature devotee. He understood that Bhagavan is not the physical form, but is that which shines in the heart of all jivas as pure awareness. If so, why was Sadhu Om so eager to see Bhagavan once again in form? Why was he not content with having Bhagavan's satsanga in his own heart?
Okay. The verses that you're referring to, Sanjay, is a work called Sri Ramana Varahe. Varahe means calling to come. The verb va means come in Tamil. So Varahe is coming. So he's praying for Bhagavan to come in form. That is, it's quite a long and involved story behind this. There's probably not time to go into it in detail now, but just to give a gist of it, that is, yes, Sadhu Om came to Bhagavan. He first came on the 6th of July, 1946, so less than 4 years before Bhagavan left the body. And At that time, he was working in the collector's office in Tanjore. But after coming to Bhagavan, he wanted to give up his, resign his job, and so that he could stay with Bhagavan. But there was some, okay, I'll just give that is shortly before Sadhu Om came to Bhagavan, he met a lady called Janaki Mata. That is, he had read Ramana, which is the Tamil biography of Bhagavan, and he wanted to know whether, because he previously tried to join the Ramakrishna, he'd gone to the Ramakrishna, the Mylapore Mutt, the Ramakrishna Mutt in Mylapore in Chennai, in order to join. And when he went there, he was told that he had to be in correspondence with them for 2 years before he could join as a brahmachari and then go on to become a sannyasi. So he after when he read Ramana Vijayam, he thought maybe there are similar procedures in Ramanashram. So he wanted to know whether anyone can go to Ramanashram to see Bhagavan or whether there's some procedures that you need to go through. So he was asking colleagues at work whether anyone knew anything about Bhagavan, and someone told him there's a devotee of Bhagavan living near here called Janaki Mata. If you go to her, she'll be able to answer all your questions. So he went to Janaki Mata and he met her, and she told him, no, Bhagavan is open to anyone can come at any time. I'm going with some of my followers this next weekend. If you want, you can join us. So the following weekend, Sadhu Om joined them and he went there. On his way there, he composed 2 songs. One is a song called Quilo de Coro, which is sending a message through a cuckoo bird, sending a message expressing his yearning. So he sent that, he composed that song as if he was a girl sending a message through the cuckoo to her beloved. He also wrote a song called Amayappa, in which he addressed Bhagavan as mother and father. So he sang those songs when he first came to Bhagavan, and Bhagavan asked him whether Murugan had seen, and Bhagavan sent him to Murugan. So from the first day, Bhagavan formed that bond between Murugan and Sadhu Om. After that, every couple of weeks or so, Sadhu Om was visiting. And very soon he decided that there's no use in continuing to work in the collector's office in Tanjore when he can be staying in Tiruvannamalai. So he decided he was going to resign his job. So he wrote a letter of resignation and he brought it with him. His intention was to give the letter of resignation to Bhagavan, so Bhagavan would read it, and when Bhagavan returned it to him, then he was going to post it. But on the way, that was at the time of that was towards the end of August of 1946. So it was just the time they were. It was on the 1st of September, they celebrated Bhagavan's Golden Jubilee. That's 50 years since he came to Tiruvannamalai. So at that time, Janaki Mata was also going, like many devotees were going to the ashram to be there for that occasion. So on that occasion, he and Janaki Mata were going together. Sadhu Om and Janaki Mata were going together. And he mentioned to her that he was planning to resign his job and that he had written this letter of resignation, which he's going to give to Bhagavan. He did that innocently, thinking that she would support it, that she'd be happy to hear that, but she wanted to be with, to stay in Tiruvannamalai and to be with Bhagavan. But she had a motherly love for him. So as with that motherly love, she was worried how he's going to manage. If he resigns his job, he won't have any income. He'll just be living as a sadhu. He'll have to beg his food and everything. So out of that motherly concern for him, before he could give this letter to Bhagavan, she said to Bhagavan, "Oh Bhagavan, he wants to resign his job and come and settle here." Bhagavan said, "Resigning job? Why is that necessary?" Something to that effect. So that put a break on his plan. But then a few months later, he decided the mistake he made was telling anyone else before doing it. So a few months later, I think that was around the time of Bhagavan's Jayanti, I think, which is, I think, in December of that year, or sometime around that time. Anyway, towards the end of the year, in December sometime, he again wrote a letter of resignation, and he came and he gave it to Bhagavan. Bhagavan opened the letter, read it, folded it, put it back in the envelope, and returned it to him. He took that as Bhagavan's blessing. So he posted the letter, and from December 1946 till the time Bhagavan left the body, he was living there. He was living in Palakottu. He had that is, from the time he met Janaki Mata, there was a very strong bond between them. One thing Janaki Mata said to him on the first day they met is, I see such a tremendous change in you from previous time. They had never before met in this lifetime. So what Sadhu Om understood that to mean was that they would have known each other in some previous life, and she was able to recognize a tremendous development, a spiritual development in him. So he had a love for her as a mother, and she had a motherly love for him. But he didn't see much of Janaki Mata. Whenever she came to Tiruvannamalai, he would see her, but they didn't have much contact during Bhagavan's lifetime. After Bhagavan left the body, Sadhu Om wanted to stay on in Tiruvannamalai. But after Bhagavan left the body, many devotees left, and there were some problems. There was some politics in the ashram and other things, and many devotees just found it very painful to be there in the ashram when Bhagavan was no longer physically present. So many devotees left at that time. Around that time, Murgana went and was staying with some friends in Chennai, and I believe Major Chadwick also left. Many devotees left, but Sadhu Om wanted to stay on. But a few months later, maybe in June or so, Janaki Mata wrote a letter to him saying that she wanted to start a Tamil journal on Bhagavan, and she wanted Sadhu Om to edit it for her. So she asked him to come back to Tanjore. And he decided, since Bhagavan is no longer physically there, yes, he agreed to this. So he went there. And he was feeling the loss of because he'd been with Bhagavan for less than 4 years. He was feeling the loss of Bhagavan's physical presence. He was feeling it very much. But when he came back to Tanjore, he found solace in the company of Janaki Mata. He once told me that he saw in her the motherly love of Bhagavan. That is one of the first songs he sang on Bhagavan. He addressed Bhagavan as Ammayappa, as mother and father. For him, Bhagavan is both mother and father. So it seemed to him that Bhagavan had provided Janaki Mata as the channel for his motherly love. So he felt great solace being in her having her there. And she was very, very sincere devotee of Bhagavan. So, I mean, it wasn't like he was going away to someone else. So there was that strong bond of love between them. And for the next 4 to 5 years, Sadhu Om was living there in Tanjore, but he wasn't there all the time. What he used to do, he would prepare I think it was, I can't remember whether it was a monthly or quarterly journal, but anyway, he would prepare the articles for the next 1 or 2 installments, and then he would go off living a parivrajika life. Parivrajika life means a life of a wandering sadhu. So he would go from village to village begging his food. And because he was aware that Bhagavan had said, but that's a very, very good training in the spiritual path to live that type of life. Bhagavan often used to praise the life of a parivrajika. Bhagavan himself was Bhagavan was a beggar. He literally, Bhagavan said at one time that there wasn't a street in Tiruvannamalai where he hadn't begged his food. So Bhagavan Sadhu Om was aware that Bhagavan often praised this lifestyle. So he wanted to experience that himself. So he would spend some months living a parivrajika life, and then he would come back to Tanjore and prepare some more installments for more issues for this Arul Patrikai, this journal called Arul. Arul means grace. And then he would go off on parivrajika life. This is how he was living for about 5 years. After nearly 5 years, that is I think it was in May 1955, Janaki Mata's husband, Dr. Ganapati Iyer, suddenly passed away. This was a great blow for Janaki Mata because though she was a devotee of Bhagavan, she had a following of her own. Particularly most of her followers were ladies, and some of them were unmarried ladies who would pray to her for a suitable husband, or if they were married, they would pray for, among other things, they would pray for sumangalatvam. Sumangalatvam means a lady is considered to be sumangali if her husband is still alive. If her husband passes away, that is a mangala. That's not auspicious. So it's in traditional Hindu society, for a woman to be unwidowed is very, very important. And in those days, I mean, old days, people often used to die young, so widowhood was very common. Some women were married as child, and even before they came to live with their husband, because they would have child, they would, in villages and other places, they'd marry a couple as when they were children, but they each continued to live with their parents till they both are old enough to live together as husband and wife. So sometimes women would be widowed even before being, or even before, like Akilanda Maya, one of the ladies who fed Bhagavan for so many years, she was widowed as a child. She was married at the age of 5 or something, and by the time she was 7 or 8, she was a widow. So she was, and it wasn't the custom for widows to remarry. So for a lady to maintain her sumangalatvam was very, very important. So many of Janaki Mata's devotees were taking her to be an aspect of Devi. They would think that she could bless them with being sumangali, being unwidowed throughout their life. So when she was widowed, for her it was a great blow. And so what she would have wanted to do was to commit sati, which is an old custom in Hinduism, but wives, if they wanted, they could choose to go on their husband's funeral pyre to give up their life along with their husband. That is what she would have liked to have done, but obviously her family wouldn't have allowed that. So she wanted some other way to end her life. So she hit upon a plan that she was going to immerse her husband's ashes in Triveni Sangam. That's in a city where the Ganga and Yamuna, where they join, and according to mythology, there's a third river, the Saraswati, that also joins at that point. So it's called Triveni Sangam, the meeting point of the three rivers. And that is in a city that was then called Allahabad and is nowadays returned to its old original name, which is Prayagraj. So that's in what is in those days was the United Provinces, is nowadays Uttar Pradesh in North India. So she didn't trust any of her family to support her. So she wanted Sadhu Om to accompany her. And she didn't directly say what her plan was, but Sadhu Om understood what her plan is. So they went by train north. First, they went to Calcutta, where one of Janaki Mata's daughters was living. And then from there, they took a train to what in those days was called Allahabad. And she asked Sadhu Om to arrange a boat to take them out into the river so that she could immerse her husband's ashes in the river. But her plan was that she herself would jump with the ashes into the river and thereby give up her life. That was her intention. Sadhu Om knew this, but Sadhu Om understood this is what she was intending to do. So he hired a boatman, but he told specifically because the two rivers are joining there, there's a very, very long sandbank going for several miles into the river between where the two rivers are joining. Between the two, there's this sandbank. So the river is shallow there. So he told the boatman, keep your boat in shallow water. Don't allow it to go into deep water. And so they were in the boat, the boatman, Janaki Mata, and Sadhu Om. And as they were going out into the river, the boatman was doing as he was told. He was carefully keeping on the sandbank. So Janaki Mata was getting impatient. She was saying, where is it? I want to immerse it where the water's deep. And Sadhu Om said, it's still the sandbank here. It's not deep enough. After some time, she thought, he's understood what her plan was. So she decided that it must be deep enough now. So she jumped off the boat into the river with the ashes. But she went only waist deep in the water. And so then Sadhu Om and the boatman helped her back into the boat. So her plan was frustrated. And then to try and console her, Sadhu Om quoted a verse that Bhagavan had translated from David Kalotram, in which it is said, for the jnani won't even have the inclination or the desire to give up the body. That is, the body is there according to, I can't remember the exact meaning of the verse, but it's something to this effect, that the jnani will not give up the body due to suicide. So Sadhu Om quoted this verse with the intention of consoling her. But she, in her very emotional state, she said to him, your self-inquiry and self-surrender is good for you and your Bhagavan. If I had worshipped Lalita, I would have retained my Sumangalatvam. She said that in an emotional state. That wasn't something she would normally have said, but because of the very emotional state she was in, she said that. But that was a shock for Sadhu Om, because he took her to be in a more elevated spiritual state. So Sadhu Om then decided it was time for him to leave. And he he told her, so long as your husband was alive, it was appropriate for me to stay here. But now your husband is no longer here, it's better that I leave. And she understood why he was leaving, but she didn't want him to go. But he insisted that he was going to leave. Then she set a condition. She said, if you leave, you can go anywhere, but don't go to Tiruvannamalai. The reason she said that was she felt it would be a shame for her if he goes. People knew that he had been staying in her place, and if he then went and stayed in Ramanashram or in Tiruvannamalai, she just didn't. She took it that it would be a shame for her, and she said to him, instead, you can go to Tirupati. If you sing in praise of Venkateshwara, with your singing ability and poetic ability, you'll certainly have a good life there. That also was a blow for Sadhu Om, because he felt she really hasn't understood him. She hadn't understood his ekabhakti to Bhagavan. So because the love that she had, well, the mutual love between them, as I say, that was a great consolation for him so long after Bhagavan left the body. So when he parted way with her, and particularly after some of the things she had said, he felt very, that is the feeling of the loss of Bhagavan's physical form, he felt very, very intensely at that time. And particularly since she had set him the condition that he shouldn't go to Tiruvannamalai, he was undecided what he should do. So a friend of his rented a room, and he was staying in that room. And while he was there, he had this strong yearning to see Bhagavan again in physical form. So he started singing these verses. And his initial idea was that he would sing 1,000 verses asking Bhagavan to come. And hoping that at some point while he was singing those verses, Bhagavan would appear. So in the end, he composed, I can't remember the exact number, it's 300 and something verses. But after a certain point, after he'd nearly completed 300, the form of Bhagavan appeared before him. But then he remembered what Bhagavan has written in Ulladu Narpadu, that seeing God without seeing oneself is seeing only it's only seeing a Manamaya Mamkakshi. So he thought, this is my own mind is projecting this. So he closed his eyes. And when he opened his eyes again, Bhagavan's form wasn't there. Then he said, this is just my own, it's my own mind is projecting that. So after some time, Bhagavan appeared again. And again, he closed his eyes. And again, Bhagavan's form disappeared. The third time Bhagavan appeared, he thought, okay, if this is really Bhagavan, I think I'm just trying to remember exactly the sequence of things. I think he's, the third time when Bhagavan appeared, Bhagavan asked him, why are you calling me to come to you? Why don't you come to me? He understood that to mean that Bhagavan is calling him to come to Tiruvannamalai. But he's had lots of experience of parivrajika life, of living as a mendicant. So he knew the problem for a sadhu is food. So he asked Bhagavan, if I come there, what shall I do for food? Then the scene changed. And in his vision, he was in the dining hall with Bhagavan. Many leaves were spread, but no one else was present. There was just Bhagavan sitting there in front of his leaf and Sadhu Om. And in front of them, there were some cooking vessels with the food in it. So Sadhu Om hesitated what to do. And then Bhagavan said, why don't you serve yourself? He took this to mean, but Bhagavan is assuring him that food will be, that if he goes to Tiruvannamalai, he will be provided for, the food and everything will be taken care of. I can't remember whether anything else was said, but I think that was it. And then he decided to come to Tiruvannamalai. So by that time, this was July 1955, he came to Tiruvannamalai. And as he entered the ashram, Venkatu, who was then the Chinnaswami's son, who was at that time, Chinnaswami had passed away a couple of years after Bhagavan. So Venkatu was then the ashram president. He saw Sadhu Om as he entered the gate, and he said, why don't you come and stay in the ashram? We need someone to help with the Tamil publications. You'll be a good person for this. So this was the last thing he expected, but he would get an invitation to stay in Ramanashram. So he accepted the invitation, and he lived in Ramanashram for the next 6 or 7 years, until finally he decided to live more independent, and he came out of Ramanashram. So does that explain the story?
Yes, sir, it does. I just have one curiosity. You said Sadhu Om sang 2 songs before he met Bhagavan, Cuckoo song and the mother-father song.
Yes.
Correct, sir? This is what you said.
Yes.
Okay. My question is, sir, how did he have that love for Bhagavan, and he knew that Bhagavan is his guru even before meeting Bhagavan? What prompted that love to come to him?
Well, he was very strongly attracted when he read the story of Bhagavan's life in Atma-vichara. And when he went to Janaki Mata, one of the first things she asked him is, do you know Aksharamlai? Aksharamlai is the 108 verses Bhagavan has sung on Arunachala. Sadhu Om didn't know any of Bhagavan's works at that time. He'd only read Bhagavan's biography. So he said no. So she said, we're going to sing it now. And they gave him a copy of the song. And while they were singing it, and he was reading it, his heart was completely melted. That moment he heard Aksharamlai, he knew Bhagavan is without a shadow of doubt, Bhagavan is his guru. And so after it was over, he said, can I keep this booklet? She said, yes, keep it. And she said, please come again. I think that was probably on a Tuesday or Wednesday, but she said, please come again tomorrow. I think it was. And the next day was Thursday. So when he went the next day, he sang Aksharamlai in front of her, but he changed the tune. He sang on his own tune. And she liked that tune so much. From that time onwards, she and her followers all sang in the same tune that Sadhu Om had set it to. Because Sadhu Om was not only a Tamil poet, he also had he didn't have any musical training, but he had a natural musical ability. So he sang it on a very in a very heart-melting bhava. That the tune he sang it on was very suited to the song. So from that time onwards, they used to sing only in the way that Sadhu Om sang.
Oh, so he was so pure that just by reading that book, he could understand that Bhagavan is his guru.
Aksharamlai was sufficient. I mean, Aksharamlai has everything in it, really. But Bhagavan, in Aksharamlai, Bhagavan is pouring his heart, all his love out for Arunachala. And another important thing happened when he first came to Bhagavan. That is, the day before he came to Bhagavan, there was some talk in Bhagavan's hall about that there often other people would be talking among themselves. So some people were talking, and they were talking about the standard of Tamil education nowadays. And they were saying nowadays the standard of Tamil education has fallen so low because everyone is only interested to learn English because If you want to have a career, you need English. So everyone is so eager to learn English. The Tamil education is being neglected nowadays. So because the standard of education has fallen so low, we can't expect to see poets of the caliber of Bhagavan or Murgana among this young generation. And then Bhagavan interjected and said, it's got nothing to do with education. If the divine inspiration is there, even without any education, they will be great poets. And he then cited some examples from the past. He talked about Jnana Sambandha. Jnana Sambandha was the child poet saint. That is, when he was an infant, sometime he was crying out for his mother's milk, and the goddess herself came and gave him her breast milk. And from that moment onwards, he became a great Tamil poet. So Jnanasambandha, he was a breastfeeding infant when he became a poet. So what education he had. And then he cited the example of Aranagiriya, who before he became a poet, he lived a life of debauchery. He was the son of a Devadasi, and he was interested only in womanizing. He wasn't interested in anything. I won't go into the details of that story, but when he finally got disgusted with his way of life and climbed to the top of second Gopram, when you're entering Tiruvannamalai temple, the second Gopram, he climbed to the top of that and jumped down. And as he jumped, he prayed to Muruga, this sinful body doesn't deserve to live, but you should save me. And because he jumped from the top of the tower, he should have died when he hit the bottom. But Muruga appeared and saved him and wrote Om on his tongue and told him to sing in praise of him. So Aranagiri is one of the greatest of all Tamil poets. So Bhagavan said, what education did Aranagiri have? He was just living a life of debauchery before that incident. So Bhagavan said it's got nothing to do with education. If the divine inspiration is there, even without education, they'll shine as very great poets. The next day, when Sadhu Om came, Murugana wasn't in the hall at that time. So Bhagavan, when Sadhu Om sang these songs, and he gave to Bhagavan and he sang the songs, Bhagavan made one or two changes. He changed the title of the cuckoo song from, I think it was from message through a cuckoo bird to the cuckoo bird's voice or something like that. I can't remember. Quilo de Coral. Then Bhagavan said, have you shown this to Murugana? Sadhu Om asked, who is Murugana? And Bhagavan said, he lives there in Palakottu. And then Sadhu Om asked, where is Palakottu? And Bhagavan gave him directions to go to Palakottu. Then after Sadhu Om said he felt so foolish. But the first question he asked Bhagavan, who is Murugana and what's the way to Palakottu? He could have asked anyone for a way to Palakottu. Why he should ask Bhagavan? He felt very foolish. But anyway, as instructed by Bhagavan, he went and he met Murugana. And that is when the friendship of Sadhu Om and Murugana, from the very first day, Bhagavan forged that friendship between them. And from that time onwards, there's a very, very close bond between the two of them. So later, when Murugana came to the hall, Bhagavan said to him, see what we were talking about yesterday. Today, the perfect example of what I was saying has come. That implying that Sadhu Om is he's a divinely gifted poet.
So, sir, when did Sadhu Om merge in Bhagavan according to you? When was
I have no means of knowing, but I have my guess is that it was around the time of singing that Ramana Varahe, because that is, Bhagavan had created a circumstance in which there was so much intense longing in his heart. So Bhagavan appeared in name and form. But Bhagavan didn't stop with that. I think he revealed himself from within. That is, I have no evidence that this is the case. This is just my inference.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I mean, the significance of this story I've told you, it can only be understood by those who can understand Tamil. Because if anyone reads this Ramana Varahe, it's such heart-melting prayers, such intense love, intense longing he had for seeing Bhagavan.
Does it have an English translation, sir? English
No, it hasn't been translated.
Have you done it? Some translations?
No, I haven't. But Sadhu Om has sung thousands and thousands of verses. There's another work, Ramana Sahasram, 1,000 verses praying for jnana. I know one or two of those, but there's one verse. I can tell you one verse from that Ramana Sahasram. Antamukhamandri Varamayiram Nan Ketalum, Endapira Varangal Ennayulle, Undirutu, Oivadara Chatram, Uddava rule. I can't remember exactly how it ends, but the meaning of it is, though I asked for 1,000 boons, other than Antamukham, that turning within, do not grant any boon but will not help me to turn within, something like that. So he prays to him not to grant his prayers, not to grant any prayer other than turning within.
Very unique prayer, very unique.
Yes.
Something very
Yes.
unique.
A prayer not to answer the prayers.
Prayer not to answer the prayer.
Yeah, but like that, there are 1,000 verses and those verses are full of Bhagavan's teachings expressed in the form of prayers.
Thank you very much, sir. I've taken a lot of your time.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Namo
Namo Ramana.
Thank you again, Mike.
One thing I just say. This story I told about Janaki Mata, I heard this story from Sadhu Om, but in those days he wouldn't often tell this story because though he had no close contact with Janaki Mata after leaving, he always had love and respect for her. He said that she was, though there wasn't the full clarity of jnana there was a Devi amsa. There was a certain amsa, a certain aspect of Devi was there. And she had very, very great love for Bhagavan. It was only in that time of great distress after the passing away of her husband that she said some of the things she said. But Sadhu Om took it that Bhagavan had arranged things in such a way that it was appropriate for him to be with Janaki Mata for those 5 years. But when Bhagavan decided that was the time to put an end to that relationship. So Sadhu Om said it's all the play of Bhagavan's grace, but he always had great love and respect for Janaki Mata. So please don't take anything that I've said as meaning anything derogatory against Janaki Mata. She was a very, very great devotee of Bhagavan. And one thing I was told by another, there was a lady, Shamala Ramachandran. She had been there with Janaki Mata before she got married. And I think after she got married, she was still there for some time, in close contact with Janaki Mata. And she told me, this was after Sadhu Om had left the body, she told me that some of the other people who were with Janaki Mata were jealous of Sadhu Om. In particular, two people. But I won't say who they were, but they were jealous because of the love because she had so much love for Sadhu Om, and they wanted that love. So some jealousy was there. So after Sadhu Om left, they were talking ill of Sadhu Om. They was calling him a guru drohi, one who has betrayed the guru, because they took, for them, Janaki Mata was guru. And Shamala Ramachandran, she was much pained to hear this. So she said to Janaki Mata, they're talking in such a way about Sadhu Om. And Janaki Mata said, what to do? Bhagavan brought him here, Bhagavan took him away. And she also said, when he was here, they were jealous of him. Now he's gone, they're happy that he's gone, but they still can't stop talking about him. There's nothing I can do about it. But so the significance of that story, when I heard that she said it was Bhagavan who brought him here, it was Bhagavan who took him away. So she understood that it was all Bhagavan's Leela. Bhagavan brought Janaki Mata and Sadhu Om together for some time for a purpose, and when that purpose was fulfilled, Bhagavan created this circumstance in which they were parted. But Shamala Ramachandran told me, but till her dying day, she always spoke very lovingly about Sadhu Om. Though sometimes she was pained by the fact that he had left, but at the same time, in her heart of hearts, she always had so much love for him. And I can say from what I've heard Sadhu Om saying, Sadhu Om also retained so much love for her. But it was Bhagavan's will that they should be separated. And that was the circumstances under which Sadhu Om sang this song, Ramana Varahe.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Michael. That was a very nice story to hear from your own words. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. Om Sri Ramanaya.
More Ramanaya.
We will